I'm Megan. I'm a writing coach, and I love helping frustrated writers finish their projects so they can meet their goals. Now, one big piece of writing is editing, which includes proofreading, which means looking for mistakes in grammar and punctuation. And what's the most loved punctuation mark, you might ask? Actually, I have to say, when I work with students, commas are actually not the most hated punctuation mark. Semicolons and dashes are. So, there you go. Bonus points for commas. So the truth about commas is, though, there are a lot of rules about how to use them correctly. The great thing for fiction writers is that we don't always have to follow the rules, so bonus for us. But we can't throw out all the rules if it means our writing is going to be unclear, hard to follow, or just plain confusing. So let's start. Number 1. Everyone knows this rule. It's pretty basic. You use commas in a list of 3 or more. So depending on what style guide you use, or personal preferences, or what country you live in, you may or may not use the Oxford comma. And that's the comma that comes in a list of 3 right before the conjunction. So right before and, but, or, etc. So typically, in America at least, we use the Oxford comma. So I say, keep it in there. I like the Oxford comma. Plus it sounds smart, right? Oxford. Number 2. You're going to use a comma to separate 2 independent clauses. Megan, I don't remember what an independent clause is. All you need to remember about an independent clause is that it's independent, so it can stand on its own. It is a full, complete sentence. The opposite of that is a dependent clause. It has to depend on something else in order to be a full, complete idea. It has to depend on an independent clause. No shame for dependent clauses. We still love them. So if you have a sentence with 2 independent clauses, you combine them with a comma and a conjunction. He turned the corner, and then he walked down the street. So you've got he turned to the corner, full, complete idea, subject, verb, it's all there. Then he walked down the street, subject, verb, complete idea is there again. 2 independent clauses, so you're going to connect them with a comma and. Are you ready for the 3rd rule of commas? I bet you are. I don't know why talking about punctuation makes me so excited. I need help. 3rd rule, you're going to use a comma when you're combining a dependent clause to an independent clause. Really, it's when the dependent clause comes at the start of the sentence as kind of an introductory phrase. So, for example, just as I was starting to write, my cat jumped on my keyboard. Has this happened to anyone I know? So the first clause is just as I sat down to write, what? We have a subject, we have a verb, we don't have a complete idea though. It's leading up to something else. My cat jumped on my keyboard. That's the full idea. There's a subject, a verb. It's a complete idea on its own. The first one is not. It's a complete idea once you add it to the second clause. So you combine it with a comma. Does that make sense? So the 3rd rule of commas is when you start a sentence with a dependent clause, you have to offset that with a comma. And then follow it up with an independent clause. Who's having fun? All right, 4th rule of commas is that you're going to use them to offset parenthetical information within a sentence. Parenthetical information is basically information you would put in parentheses, so it's not 100% necessary to the sentence. There are a few ways to offset parenthetical information depending on how important it is to the sentence. If you're using commas, it's probably pretty important, but it's not necessary. So what's an example of this? I'll just stick with the cat theme. My cat, who's black and fluffy, eats breakfast every morning. The main sentence here is, my cat eats breakfast every morning. The parenthetical information, the added information that's not really necessary to understand the sentence is, who's black and fluffy. It adds a little bit to the sentence, gives us more of a picture, but it's not 100% necessary. And if we just said, my cat who's black and fluffy eats breakfast every morning, it would start to be kind of a run-on. So you offset that with commas. So that was rule number 4. We're more than halfway there. Oh, did I forget to tell you there were 7 rules? My bad. All right, the next rule for commas is to use them when you're directly addressing someone. So you could say something like, Megan, I don't think that's right. So you'd say, Megan, comma, I don't think that's right. Or you could say something like, you know what, Megan, you are totally right. And you would say, you know what, comma, Megan, comma, you are totally right. So you're setting off a name because, again, it's kind of like additional information, but this time it's important because it tells the reader who you're talking to. So that was the 5th rule for commas, and it was an itty-bitty rule. The 6th rule for commas is to use commas to offset quotations. This is something that, as writers, we should probably know. Whenever you set up dialogue, you're going to add a comma just before the quotation marks, put your dialogue in, and then before you close the quotation marks, you're going to add another comma. Or a period, or an exclamation point, or a question mark, but you're going to put your punctuation inside the quotation marks. Okay, so that's rule number 6. Another simple rule is that you use commas to offset quotation marks or introduce dialogue. Final rule, rule number 7 for commas, is that you're going to use them when you're talking about titles, addresses, and dates. So really, is it 3 rules in 1? I don't know. In dates, your commas are going to look like this. You're going to put a comma between the day, you already knew that, and you're going to put a comma after the year. Sometimes people don't know that. I did not know that for a while. Similarly, for addresses or places, you're going to put the city, comma. You already knew this. You're going to put the country or the state or the area, whatever. Then you put another comma and you finish your sentence. And then the same rule goes for titles. So if you're talking about James Smith, PhD, you're going to put a comma between Smith and PhD. All right, so that's basically it. So should we recap all of our comma rules? If you've stayed with me this far, good for you. You're a secret comma lover, I know it. Don't judge how much I love talking about commas. All right, rule number 1, you're going to use your commas in a list of 3 or more, and we're going to use that Oxford comma unless you don't want to. Rule number 2 for commas is that you're going to use them to separate 2 independent clauses. The third rule for commas is you're going to use them to offset a dependent clause from an independent clause. So you start with the dependent clause, comma, then the independent clause. Fourth rule for commas is you're going to use them to offset parenthetical information. Fifth rule for commas, you're going to use them when you're addressing someone directly. The sixth rule for commas is you're going to use them when you're setting up dialogue, so always put a comma right before the dialogue starts. And the last rule for commas is to use them with addresses, titles, and dates. The more you know. All right, that's all I got for you. Are there any comma rules that I missed? Probably, because there's about 1,000 rules for commas. Really? So just remember, when you're writing fiction, you don't have to hold really tightly to these rules. You can play around with it and get creative, but just remember that the main thing is your story needs to make sense, it needs to be clear, and you don't want your reader going, I don't know what's happening. But if you're looking for ways to proofread your work, now you know at least what to look for in terms of keeping your commas in line. So I hope you found this video helpful as you proofread your story. If you're wondering whether your story is ready to submit out into the world, I have a video on that you can watch up here, or you can watch my video on how to submit a short story. Thank you so much for letting me teach you a little bit about commas today. It was weirdly enjoyable for me, and I will see you next time. Bye.